Okay, now we're going to move on to chapter 1, part 2, and we're going to talk about what makes art important or valuable to people. So some of the earliest known art is in Indonesia in the South Sulawesi caves, and it is like now it's 42,000 years ago this art was made in 39,900 to 37,500 BC, and we can only guess why these drawings were made. A lot of them are of animals. A lot of them will also have hands that have been stenciled in, and we can only conclude that they were ritual imagery drawn in relationship to the hunt or to honor the animal, or like related to sacrifice. We just really don't know. We can only guess, but we can speculate pretty well because of why, since that time, art was made up until the late 1800s, early 1900s. There's some overlap there. So before the 20th century, it was really easy to understand why art was made, why it was important, and the reasons, for the most part, were, no matter where you were in the world, was for religious or spiritual reasons. The art was made for wealthy or powerful patrons. It could be part of the place they lived in, part of the clothing they wore, part of the jewelry they had. All these fineries, they were made for these rich and powerful patrons. The art was made to decorate homes. It could be on the inside of your house, like this Dutch still life, which these Dutch still lifes were a lot of times of flowers, or of they would have butterflies in them, but sometimes they'd have skulls in them. Pocket watches, they had to do with the passing of time and the vanity of life. These this is like art to decorate homes. Could be on the outside of the home, like this tradition of in South Africa, and we'll learn more about that later during the semester. There could be art that had functional reasons, like these screens that were made in Japan, and they again, it would be for somebody wealthy. Like they would also a lot of times have gold leaf on them because it reflected light, and the screen would be used to protect the inside of the home from drafts of wind. And then another reason why art was made was to decorate, to illustrate books and other publications. Those could be like this Coptic religious art here. It could be like a biblical text, or it could be like these like early Japanese magna. It could be to illustrate legends about these creatures that could like entice you and then kill you, or it could be to illustrate like stories or historical novels, etc., etc. So now we're going to talk about those paintings we saw earlier, and these are like the South African Ndebele house paintings. So the Ndebele, they were like these really great warriors, and they then, when they were defeated by the Afrikaners, the people of Dutch descent, they were forced into indentured labor on farm. Their lands were taken away from them. They had to work for others on farms for 5 years plus. Like, you would think your time was up, and then they would figure out some reason why you needed to work for free for some more. And they had previously lived in these communal villages, like there would be round huts that people lived in, and then they were moved to these more Western style compounds with these square homes for a man, his wife, and his children. And the women maintained their cultural identity and traditions by painting on the outside of the homes, because everything else was taken from them. Their culture was taken from them. A lot of times their languages were taken away from them. They were forced into these more Western traditions. And so the women in these villages, and they still do, paint these beautiful homes. And a lot of times the imagery will be real simple imagery. It'll be like, these are the shape of razor blades. They could have telephone poles in them, or like a shopkeeper scale, or license plates. But they were a way of people maintaining their pride and their cultural traditions and identity. They wore beaded clothing, and the beaded clothing were often in these colors that we have here. So they, because they were forced to wear more Western styles, they translate that into the outside of their homes. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Art League Houston or Project Row Houses, but Project Row Houses had a group of these Indebelly seamstresses and beaters come and stay at Project Row Houses a few years ago. And they made these beautiful beaded works. And then they there's a local artist and a clothing designer named Selvin O'Keefe O'Jarman, who also worked with these women on a beaded project that he did that is now on the outside of Art League Houston. And Art League Houston, during non-coronavirus times, sells beaded jewelry and dolls and handbags and stuff that these women, these very talented women, have made. So nowadays, like, people are starting to think about art as a commodity, that it's a business investment to be bought and sold. And I'm going to read you this quote from a chief executive of London's Fine Art Fund Group. His name's Philip Hoffman. And he says, the transaction costs in art are by and large much higher than in stocks and real estate, but the opportunity to make gains in the short term also might be higher. With stocks, in a year or two, you might be able to make 2% to 5%. But with art, you have the opportunity to make serious money. I've made 100% returns on many deals. So, so people are, like, some people are buying art because of how wealthy it's going to make them, but also they were buying it for prestigious reasons. And there's an artist that sort of takes advantage of this, named Damien Hirst. And there's a piece by Damien Hirst on the lower floor of the Carolyn Weiss building of the Museum of Fine Arts that is like really essentially a medical cabinet with medical tools. And then there's two hanging skeletons. And this is another piece that he used with a skull. It's called For the Love of God. It cost him $14 million to make this. It's made with platinum and diamonds, and it's a skull that's covered in these, and it was sold for $50 million. While I'll post a video on our Blackboard page for today. So there's like there's artists who, at the time they made these, Rembrandt, when he had to declare bankruptcy while he was still alive, and because he had like a poor business sense, but also he wasn't making that much money from his work. And now look how much, like these two portraits, $180 million. This relatively very small Leonardo da Vinci, Salvator Mundi, the savior of the world, $450 million. There's other examples of just like incredible amounts of money that this art is going for. Of course, all these artists are dead, so they don't get any of it. But really, seriously, art, that's not the intention of art. Art's meant to be more than something you hang over your couch or that matches your couch. It's not meant to be a vanity item that conveys your self-worth. It should be something that you feel an emotional connection to. It should be valued in terms of emotional worth. And a few years ago, I ran across this small booklet by Leo Tolstoy, famous Russian writer, philosopher. And he wrote this little book called What is Art? And it really struck me about how truly important and true the things that he says in the book in relationship to art. So I'm going to read you some of these. So in order to correctly define art, it is necessary to cease to consider it a means to pleasure and to consider it one of the conditions of human life. Viewing it this way as a human condition, we cannot fail to observe that art is one of the ways people communicate and relate to one another. Every work of art causes a viewer to enter into a certain kind of relationship with the person who made the art and with all who simultaneously, previously, or subsequently experience the artwork. Art begins with when one person, with the object of joining others to himself or herself in one and the same feeling, expresses that feeling through the creation of an artwork. So that artwork, by the way, doesn't just have to be a painting or sculpture or drawing. It can be a book. It can be a dance. It can be a musical performance. It can be it can be a piece of jewelry. It can be a piece of beautiful clothing. So art is a means of connection. The more sincere the artist is, the more that the artist is impelled by an inner need to express his, and I'll add in her, feeling, the more the artist has drawn it from the depths of his or her nature, the more sympathetic and sincere will the work of the artist be. If the work does not transmit the artist's peculiarity of feeling and is therefore not individual, if it is unintelligibly expressed or has not proceeded from the author's inner need for expression, it's not a work of art. So what that means is, just like I'll admit, I know some artists that they go like, and then they throw a bunch of crap on a canvas, and then people are like, that's gonna look great in my house, and then they buy it. But that's not true art. That art does not have a sincerity of feeling. And the more sincere an artist is, the more that artist is impelled by an inner need to express his or her feelings. And if they're not expressing those feelings, and if those feelings are not conveyed to you in one way or another, it's not a work of art. It's like it's like a piece of canvas with some crap thrown on it. So when people buy art as a commodity, their perception of what art really is totally lost. They lose that it's our way of communicating with others, with the artists and with all of those that have seen the artwork, or that will see the artwork, or that have in the past seen the artwork, it totally loses that meaning. So I bet almost all of you, if not all of you, have seen this Vincent van Gogh painting, Starry Night. And it's like, it's on screensavers, it's on coffee cups, like people have it on their phone case. It's, you know, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. But when this painting was made, when Van Gogh was alive, he only sold one painting in his entire life. He made thousands of paintings and drawings, and it was not accepted at the time it was made. And the person that bought his painting bought it anonymously, and it was his brother that bought it. So now he's considered one of the greatest artists of all time. But at the time, people were like, what a loon. So we're gonna talk about new ways of painting that are initially rejected, and then suddenly this person, you know, becomes a master artist that we all study in school and we revere, or some of us revere them. So we're going to talk about a French artist named Edouard Manet, and a really famous painting of his, Luncheon on the Grass, which was made in 1863. He's French. This is during our Civil War. And when it was first painted, it was completely rejected as scandalous and bad painting and everything else. So we're gonna talk about this. So Manet entered Luncheon in the Grass in the Royal Salon. He entered it in 1863, and it was rejected. But he had gotten other work accepted 2 years before. In this painting, The Spanish Singer, was accepted. A couple of other paintings he did were. But in 1863, he and about 3,000 other artists had their work rejected from the Salon. So what is the Royal Salon? The Royal Salon was established in 1667, and it was the official art exhibition of the French Academy of Fine Arts in Paris. It was the Royal Academy of Arts. It was set up by, I believe, Louis Philippe, and it was a biannual, every 2 years. It was a juried exhibition. And if you were accepted into the Royal Salon, then your career was made. It's like being on The Voice and winning. And they would hang the Royal Salon, they would hang it all chock-a-block, where there would be like literally no spaces between the paintings, and they went from floor to ceiling. But in 1863, Manet's work is rejected. So the Royal Academy of Art, this is a place that it provided instructions to artists. It had these, like, once every 2 years exhibitions. You could display your art there, and you get critical acclaim, and you could make connections with wealthy patrons, and these patrons would, you know, like somebody rich buys your painting, and then somebody else rich wants to buy your paintings, and it propelled artists to prominence. So in 1863, the Luncheon in the Grass, it's like, it causes the biggest scandal, but not because of the nudity, which you would think that would be why. For example, a few years before, Alexander Cabanel's The Birth of Venus was accepted into the Salon. This lady, she's like naked as a jaybird, and there's a bunch of naked little babies flying around her, and she's all stretched out, and you see like all her business. But it was totally fine. It was completely accepted into it. Now, why? We'll figure out why is that. So the jurors, the people that made the selections for the salon, they were super conservative in some ways. They preferred traditional subject matter. So the subject matter had to be historical or biblical or mythological. That's why the birth of Venus was accepted, because it's a mythological subject. They did not like unfinished or rapidly painted work with like obvious brushstrokes. They wanted everything to be nicely blended in. They didn't like contemporary ideas. They didn't want things that were set in contemporary times, although slowly and gradually more modern works made it through. So like nudity was okay, was as long as it was about a mythological or historic subject matter. It was also like an excuse for guys to, like rich guys to go like, ooh la la, here, let me show you my painting of this mythological subject, when really they're showing a painting of a naked lady. So like I said before, that year about 3,000 people had gotten rejected from the Royal Salon. The so like Napoleon III, he was like, well, that's not really fair. That's an awful lot of people. So let's do this. Let's set up another exhibition, the Salon des Refus, for those people that were rejected from the Royal Salon. Well, a bunch of those people that were rejected were like, I'm not going to put my work in there at that, because then everybody knows I was rejected. So only 500 of the 3,000 people participated. And even here, Manet's work was condemned. So all this negative attention was focused on his painting. And we have to like wonder, like, why was this? Like, that's a naked lady, like, oops, I'm sorry, I gave it away. That's a nude lady, like in that other painting. So let's talk about what his sources of inspiration were. So one of the works that he was inspired by was a copy of a painting by an artist named Titian. And the copy of the painting was an etching done by this guy named Marcantonio Raimondi. Here's what the entire etching looks like. So along the banks of the river in this image are 3 river gods, 2 men and a woman river god. And the woman river god is looking at us, like this, very much like that, same poses. And then something else it was inspired by was oh man, you know what, I told you the wrong thing about who this painting was by originally. Originally this painting on the left was by Raphael. I'm sorry, I got mixed up. And the one on the right is by Titian. Raphael was a Renaissance artist. Titian came around later, just a little later. And then there's 2 men, they're fully dressed. They're sitting outside playing musical instruments, or they're probably mostly drinking. And they're with these 2 women, and they're in this wooded pastoral scene. And that one was like, that's totally acceptable. But why? Why? I mean, these are like 2 regular women and these 2 regular men. But why is this more acceptable than this? Well, let's figure out why. So this painting was upsetting for a couple of reasons. One, because if a river goddess is naked and stares at you, you're like, well, that seems totally normal. But if a regular woman that's naked, now she's naked, she's not nude, she's naked, stares at you, what if you're like walking down the street, you're somebody and you see a woman that you might know, or maybe you're interested in her, but she didn't have any clothes on and she's staring at you. What, you'd probably feel slightly uncomfortable at the very least. So, oops, I'm going the wrong direction. So that was one thing, was that this is a regular woman who is without clothing and she's staring straight at you, which makes you look at her, which could make you feel uncomfortable. And then this woman, she was like a real woman. She was modeled after Victorine Morin, who was a model for Manet and some other artists. And the arts community was relatively small. Paris was nowhere near as big as it is now. So people knew her, so then that made it even more uncomfortable. And then the men, they're kind of like a composite of Manet's brother and future brother-in-law, which everyone knew. They all knew those people. So that made people also like, oh, geez, we know these guys. Then the other thing was, let me see if I talk about this here, is the way it was painted. Now, Titian, in his painting, he's like carefully blending everything slowly from, you know, like the effects of light from dark to light. And, you know, there's some evidence of brushstrokes, but it's evidence of like the shapes of leaves or the tendrils in hair. But then Manet, he doesn't care. He's just like slap, 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 let me slap on the paint that goes where the river and the landscape are that this lady's in. And then the jurors were like, oh my God, you can see his brushstrokes and he doesn't even care if it's blended properly or not. So they're all upset about that. Another thing that upset them was, originally this was called the bath, and then Manet like jokingly called it La Partie Carrée, which is a menage a trois, is a party of two men. And oh, it's more than a menage a trois because there's four. It's a party of two men and two women, and what are they going to do? And this lady, she's just like thrown her clothes over here to the side all sloppily. And this lady, guess what this lady's doing? She is in the water peeing. That everyone recognized what she was doing as peeing. So they were like, oh my God, that's horrifying. And then the other thing is that people recognize the wooded area. They're in a park that they're in. And this is a park where people would go and pick up prostitutes. So that further scandalizes everybody. And then I just want to show you that, like, this is all cracked because it has, not on purpose, it has varnish on it. And after time, the varnish starts to crack. But when this was originally made, this Titian painting, he did this to like, he's like painting this to look like flesh. This looks like a marble bath. This is reflective like glass. He's, you know, he's trying to like, here's a shadow because there's less light coming in there. He's really trying to make this look realistic. And he's trying to disguise the fact that a human painted it. But then Manet is just like, I'm painting this quickly. And look, you can tell a person painted it because there's all these brush strokes and stuff. It's more spontaneous looking, although it was probably really well planned. Then also the other thing is he his sense of space is not, you know, like up here, this gets all jumbled up and doesn't look that three-dimensional, just like kind of slapped on. And back here, this things get like, they're more realistic in the background of the Titian painting. And that upset people because he doesn't really care if he's using 1 or 2 point like linear perspective. He's just like kind of slapping it together. And then I want to go back to the original. Now, also another way that the sense of space is kind of messed up is this woman, if she's this big, and we're assuming that she's kind of a little far away, if she walked up to these people, she'd be about 8 feet tall. So he didn't really care about making it look realistic. And so, like, at first it was scandalous, but then all the young guys and the handful of women artists who were allowed to be artists were like, wow, I want to paint like that. And so it introduced this new way of, like, not really caring about these rules of art and not really thinking about how three-dimensional it looks or how carefully you blended the paint. And so people were like, it was kind of like it gave them the freedom to paint how they wanted and not to follow all these academic rules. So now we're going to talk about a kind of art, public art or civic art. And this is art that is, it can be a sculpture, a painting, it can be a light rail station, it can be any sort of thing that's been planned and executed with the intention of being staged in the physical public domain, usually outside and accessible to all. So there's rules when you make public art, and a lot of times public art will be paid for by government grants, or corporations will pay for it. So, like, if you go to a museum or gallery and it's showing controversial work with adult content, like, what options are you and your family faced with? Well, you can either choose to go in and go see it, or you can choose not to go in and not go see it. And a lot of times nowadays they'll put up a little sign and they'll say this has adult content, and it'll be in a room where you can't see it from the lobby of the museum. It'll be someplace that's enclosed, so you're not forced to see it. But with public art, pardon me, so horrifying. With public art, you don't really have a choice. So 55 million people a day see public art whether they want to or not. So there have to be certain restrictions on what is acceptable and what is not. It's just part of what you have to deal with. So I'm going to talk about the funding for these kind of things. In 1967, the National Endowment for the Arts, they established a fund where artists, literary artists, performing artists, visual artists could apply to get funding to make their art. And as part of the National Endowment for the Arts, they started a program called Art in Public Places. This was within the NEA. And they modeled that program on the Philadelphia Percent for Art program. And they used a Municipal Arts Commission, which was formed in '65, and which is now called the Houston Arts Alliance Department of Civic Art and Design. And these are funded, the way they get their funding for these is 1% of a city's hotel and motel tax goes toward Houston's program, 1% goes toward Philadelphia's Percentage for Art program. But the National Endowment for the Arts gets their funding in most part from the government, from the national government. So back in the day when the public art program, APP, was first established, there were several controversies. One was Richard Serra was an artist who made this tilted arc. It's I believe it's 15 feet tall and 150 feet wide. I could be a little bit off on this. And it was placed in the middle of a government plaza, and people started complaining because they thought that, one, it made them walk around it to get to the other side. Oh, how sad for them. People thought that terrorists would hide behind it. People thought that it would gather trash and that rats would be all over the place. So people were upset about this, and a judge like took it to court, and then even though more people said let's keep it than not, the judge ordered it removed, and they chopped it up in the middle of the night without telling the artist, and it's been in storage ever since then. And then another example of something that really upset people was by an artist named Andre Serrano. He was part of an exhibit that was partially funded by the NEA, and he had like something filled with urine, and then in it he had a little statue of Christ, and that really upset people. So what happened was the NEA, not the Art in Public Places program, but the NEA stopped funding visual artists. I got a grant from them before they stopped funding visual artists. And so now they only fund performing artists and literary artists. But the Art in Public Places program continue to fund public artists, but it started placing more restrictions on how the decision was made to create the work and how they were funded. So now we're going to talk about a really famous piece of public art and how now people like flock to it, but at the time it was thought to be like a horrible slap in the face of American Vietnam veterans. So this is the Vietnam War Memorial on the Mall in Washington, D.C., and it's by an artist named Maya Lin. And here's the story behind it. So the Vietnam War, people that came back, vets that came back from the Vietnam War were not honored. They were called baby killers. They were called all sorts of names. There was no parade for them. And in the late 70s, a former Vietnam vet, Jan Scruggs, started the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. And there was a national juried competition for design, and it received partial funding from the Art in Public Places. That's part of the NEA. In 1980, the land was allocated by Congress on the National Mall to build the memorial. So like I said, the Vietnam War was super controversial. So there was this jury competition, and 1,400 plus people entered it. So Maya Lin, she was like in graduate school or undergraduate school at Yale, and she was taking a class on funerary memorial design, where they design funeral memorials. And she and her fellow students saw the ad for this jury competition, and they all got in the car and they went to the National Mall and looked at the site where it was going to be. And when Maya went to the site, she looked at the landscape and imagined taking a knife and cutting it into the earth, opening it up, an initial violence and pain that would in time heal. She meant this as a metaphor for the painfulness of the Vietnam War. So her design was going to be this big granite, black granite V sunk into the ground. It's going to have a reflective surface, and she wanted this to be like, so it has the names of all the missing and dead. They're listed in chronological order, and you would walk down in here and then you could see your reflection. So it kind of like takes you to the quieter, darker, more peaceful world beyond where the dead are residing. So she creates these two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead. She inscribed the names in chronological order so that families of friends, they would know what year their loved one died, and then they could go to that year and it'd be easier for them to find the name of the person who died. So it's unlike any other war memorial. It's not, the work is not figurative, like there's always like these statues, and it's more non-representational, and people immediately before it's even built, they start responding negatively. People are upset because she's Chinese American, but they're thinking Asian, Vietnamese, Asian, Chinese, it didn't matter to them. They're upset because they picked somebody who is of Asian descent. Then people are just saying like, it's too feminine. It's a nihilistic slab of stone. It's a black scar hidden in a hole, hidden out of shame, inappropriate. They're just like upset for really for no reason because they haven't even seen it. And they say because there's a list of names, they compare it to a police report. So Congress they're just acting like really stupid. What else is new? Anyway, so they're like saying, no, you have to make it out of white marble. And you can only order the marble from these two countries. You can't order it from Canada because they, like they held Vietnam, like people that were conscientious objectors to the war, like went to to Canada. So they're like doing all these stupid things where they're trying to place all these restrictions on what she could do. And they like the Vietnam Post, they have a headline that reads Asian Memorial for an Asian War. Then so they're trying to talk her out of the black granite because they say it's too feminine. And they said she couldn't order it. Okay, I started to say this a minute ago, but she couldn't order it from the best sources, which are Canada and Sweden, because that's where the Vietnam War conscientious objectors and resistors were granted asylum. And so people are just thinking of all these reasons why she can't do it. And then they say, you have to have a statue of wounded soldiers and a flag that are going to be placed in the center of the Vietnam War Memorial. And she argues them out of that. They move it to the side, and then they take the flag down, and then they like they put another statue in there, like to the side, that is in honor of the women that served, and then there's one in honor of the men that served, and so they're like, as soon as they start construction, though, all this negative press disappears, and then people like start physically interacting with it, where they're leaving things, they're touching their loved one's name. They touch them so much that they have to go back and recarve them every once in a while. That like millions of people visit the Vietnam War Memorial every year. It's like one of the most beloved war memorials that there ever was. And but poor Maya Lin, she was so upset about all of this. She pretty much disappeared from the scene for a while because she was getting all this hate mail, and I'll include a video in our folder about an interview with her. So so here we go again, from something that was considered a slap in America's face to something that Americans find more beloved than anything. So we're going to go back. So that's a work of public art. And we're going to talk about what do public artists have to consider and deal with when awarded with public art commissions. So you just, you like, I'm showing this because when this was installed at, it's where Art League Houston is now. There were like 2 old cottages that have been used for their offices in their school. And then they did a giant fundraising effort and they decided to build a new building. They let these 2 artists, Dean Ruck and Dan Hovel, take it and convert it into this work of art where it was called Inversion. And it was like this funnel tunnel that people were not supposed to crawl through, but they crawled through. So when artists are making public works of art, what's good about it is they get to move from making smaller works that are inside of galleries and museums to making much larger works in city parks and landscape, cityscapes and public buildings. So they go from small to large. They can work on this much larger scale. This is at Herman Park. I'm sure a lot of you have seen Sharon Engelstein's Dilly to Die. They get a much larger viewing artist and already said that, like, when this was up, 39,000 people a day drove past it. They provide opportunities for artists to interact with the public while making or installing their artwork. This is in the this is Trenton Dole Hancock, and this is the tunnel of the Herman Park train. They let artists find these alternate means of expression, like so they can, this is at Discovery Green, they can work with natural elements such as wind, rain, and the sun. But there are a lot of disadvantages for making public art. One of them, this is a Banksy, and it's not a public, like a civic work of art, it's street art. You can't create whatever you want. You can't have any adult content. You can't have anything remotely offensive. So some artists don't even want to do public art because of that. Another thing is it's not just you like going, I'm going to do this, and then you do it. You have to work with city planners, engineers, architects, and government bureaucrats. And because public opinion matters, your original idea gets, like, it might start out looking really great and then it gets watered down till it's nothing, resembles nothing like what you originally intended. Because the artist has to work with so many people and you have to, get city permits, building permits. You got to deal with all this paperwork and stuff. It takes you a lot longer to complete the work than expected. Like this artist, who I know really well, whose name is just totally, I'm drawing a blank on it. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Ed, his name's Ed. He got a commission for George R. Brown, and then at the last minute, the Department of Civic Art and Design decided, no, he can't do it. And they took it away from him. And then there was kind of a battle over it. And then eventually they re-awarded it to him because they realized what they had done was wrong. So from start to finish, it took him 5 years to do it. But then when things like, so you also have to, when you're an artist, you have to take safety concerns into consideration. You don't want a work of art that is going to stab somebody or roll over and squash them. And the projects end up costing a lot more than the artist is paid. So Ed, I think it was paid something like, I don't know, like, I want to say like $25,000. Well, so $25,000 over 5 years, that's about $5,000 a year. But then also you have to pay for the scaffolding, pay for the materials, pay for the people that are helping you fabricate it and install it. So after a while, it ends up costing much more than the artist is paid. But I have lots of friends that do public art, and despite all of that, they love doing these commissions, and they I think they do it more for love than for money. Anyway, that's the end of today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon.